What I do is I authorize my military. We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately. If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare that really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference, tremendous difference.
The president painting a clearer picture. Yeah, we're going to play a little music, demonstrate the moment of impact there in Afghanistan on the Moab in Nangarhar province. But that's after a major strike in that ISIS stronghold yesterday. This new video shows that moment, as we talked about. 36 ISIS fighters, potentially more, losing their lives, thankfully, from that strike. What message does this send to the rest of the world? Here to discuss is former Army intelligence officer Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, former advisor to UN and NATO commanders in Afghanistan Andrew Peek, and former U.S. Army intelligence officer and New York State Assemblyman Kieran Lawler. Kieran, I will start with you. The president talked about authorization, and some people are talking about the process of authorization. Does that matter, and what do our commanders in the field want?
I think they want, a free rein to do what they're trained to do. So many wars in the last 50 years, we've talked about Americans fighting with one arm tied behind their back. Well, President Trump, with this authorization, has taken a major step towards untying one of those arms.
Very much so. Andrew, civilian casualties always get talked about. Elizabeth Warren obsesses about it right away. The New York Times puts it in their subheadline. There were 0 civilian casualties in this case. Should that be how every strike is judged?
Well, absolutely, we would like to have fewer civilian casualties in any strike. That is not the only determinant of success, right? It is whether the mission was accomplished, and then a subsidiary concern is, were there civilian casualties? So in this situation, allegedly there were 0, as per the Afghan government, and I'm inclined to believe them, since usually they exaggerate the number of civilian casualties. They don't downplay it.
And Hamid Karzai coming out today, condemning it, talking about it in ways that are counterproductive to actually defeating ISIS there. Colonel, before I go to you, I want to play a montage of the mainstream media accusing President Trump of flip-flopping, changing his positions. You've got an interesting take on it. Let's play that sound first.
From President Trump, a flurry of flip-flops.
I said, here's the problem with NATO. It's obsolete.
I said it was obsolete. It's no longer obsolete.
That rhetorical reversal on NATO, just one of several in the past 24 hours. From President Trump, a very different tone about the country he previously called an enemy.
President Xi wants to do the right thing.
What a change from candidate Trump, who repeatedly used China as a punching bag.
Colonel, are we looking at a flip-flop?
No, of course not. Look, on the NATO issue, he was very clearly articulating that NATO is outmoded. A number of folks behind the scenes over the past 6 months, and I met with him briefly in this back in August. The idea is to reinvigorate NATO and to make it a 21st century tool of foreign policy. That's what he's doing. Secondly, regarding the quote-unquote flip-flop regarding the enemy, look, he is clearly using military forces, we stipulated, for purposes of foreign policy. This is a departure from the past president. So now that you've done that, you have leverage with people you consider either challengers or enemies. So what you see is both an education. President Trump is learning. Let's hope he doesn't overlearn. We don't want to see him become a neocon and use force unneededly. With that said, he's being very effective in trying to blend the ideas of military force, the idea of updating military capabilities with the purposes of driving foreign policy forward, breaking from the past. So this is not a flip-flop. This is progression.
And well, Kieran, to that point, and he's inheriting a world after 8 years that hasn't seen American lead, that's seen us retreat and apologize, lead from behind, if you will. There's a lot of this a reflection not of wanting to nation build or be suddenly a neocon, but instead for the U.S. to assert itself.
Yeah, he's dealing with the reality that he inherited. And it's ironic because the press is now criticizing him for taking more conventional positions. Some of these positions, like the Syrian strike, had bipartisan support. And it's an example of whatever President Trump does, he's going to be criticized. And I don't think they're flip-flops. I think Trump plays both the bad cop and the good cop. You saw the bad cop when he said NATO was obsolete, and you saw the good cop when he made some attempts to work with NATO. Now he praises them. And I think that's what's going on here, not flip-flopping.
Absolutely. Andrew, the Colonel talked about how this opens the door for diplomacy diplomacy, when you show the willingness and ability to use military force, where's the best opening here going forward? You've got North Korea, you've got Syria, you've got what's going on in Afghanistan. Where do we go next?
We are rapidly heading towards a showdown with North Korea. I think that is going to be a crucial diplomatic point in the next week where there's going to be some result out of the Korean Peninsula on the nuclear issue. For the first time, China sounds like it's genuinely on our corner. You know, I think that's part of what fed into the flip-flop narrative that Trump said something positive about the Chinese leadership. But that only reflects that China has made positive steps towards our own position. So if he just continued to be negative, then what would China's incentive have been to help us on this coming diplomatic showdown?
And Colonel, we only have 10 seconds here, so I'm going to put you on the spot. If there's an emerging Trump doctrine, what does it look like?
Don't do dumb things and break the failed policies of the past and do something different and try to achieve victory. Very simple.
America first, it sounds
America, well, victory.
And hit hard.
First, America first, and hit hard. Tony Shaffer, Andrew Peek, and Kieran Lawler, thank you very much for joining us a second time this morning. A lot of stuff to discuss.